All right, getting started today, just reviewing foreign policy. So, the basic distinction between foreign and domestic policy, as you'll remember, is that domestic policy takes place inside of the country. Okay, so remember the word dome, so think of domestic. Okay, domestic policy is all of the topics and issues that are passed or settled inside of a country. So, you think of things like taxation. Education policy, healthcare policy, building infrastructure, immigration policy, at least insofar as dealing with legal migration and naturalization. These are all things that are domestic in nature. Okay, so that's domestic policy. Then on the other side, we have foreign policy. Foreign policy, as we learned, is everything that deals with us and our relationships with the rest of the world, with the over 200 other countries not named America around the world. So you think of things like war, obviously. You think of things like international trade, okay? You think of things like immigration, insofar as the countries that we allow people to come from, or countries that maybe we don't allow people, or rations of people to come from. The amount of people that come per year, why they're coming, is it a refugee situation, are they just trying to resettle, are they migrant workers, etc. Immigration can kind of be both domestic and foreign depending on what you're dealing with. Treaties are a matter for foreign policy. Treaties, of course, are agreements between the United States and either a country or another country. Diplomacy, talking with other countries. We learned about international organizations like the United Nations or NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We learned about the World Bank. We learned about the European Union. That's not something that the United States is a part of, but it's still an example of an area that allows different countries to talk through their problems prior to or instead of resulting in warfare. And of course, it's another example of the power of international trade. The European Union and the United Nations were both created after World War I and World War II as an attempt to prevent another worldwide war from ever happening again. The theory behind the United Nations was if we have everybody in the world talking constantly and having an actual venue for that, that there'd be a decrease in the likelihood of a worldwide war. Now, it is definitely not settled or prevented war or conflicts around the world. And we talked in class about why some of that is, but it is not, there has never been another worldwide war like there was in World War I and II. Similarly, the European Union was created to put a stop to centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries of war in Europe between Spain and England and France and Germany and Austria-Hungary and Italy and Portugal. The sort of Game of Thrones mentality that there was in the European continent for like several hundred years came to an end, to a large degree, as a result of the European Union. Now, the European Union has problems, and England has left, as we learned, the so-called Brexit. But nevertheless, the sort of economic interdependence and connections and the power of trade has made it so that these countries that had spent 500 years fighting over, land and, lines on a map, have not. It's a profound, consistent amount of peace on the European continent between the major powers, and so that's not insignificant. So international organizations that the government are part of, like the ones I just described, are called intergovernmental, and then there's the non-governmental organizations. Those are things like the Red Cross, or Doctors Without Borders, or Habitat for Humanity. These are organizations where citizens like you and like me, we support them. That's where they get their money, and they go in and provide help and assistance to people around the world. They're international in the sense that they go into many countries and they try to solve many problems like disease or famine, cleaning up after natural disasters, responding to climate change, or responding to terrorism and warfare, education, medicine, clean water. Any problem that you can identify, there's probably some organization that goes around the world trying to solve it. So those are non-governmental organizations. So that's the basic distinction between domestic and foreign policy. Foreign policy is everything outside the country. Domestic policy is everything inside the country.